Deep in the underground, stay focused.
That's Nick Boundy, better known as M4Sonic. The electronic music producer burst onto the scene in 2012, earning notoriety for making bangers with his unique Launchpad system. Nick's success took him on a wild ride around the world. He's performed at some of the biggest festivals and experienced a peak few ever come close to. But the high didn't last, and under constant pressure to produce and handle everything going on outside of the music, he found himself crashing back down to earth.
Massively introverted. I took my PlayStation with me to America.
How were you able to keep your sanity, or did you feel like you did?
No, lost it. There were a couple of grounding things.
Nick's learned more than he could have imagined this past decade. What's real, what's fake, what matters, who he is, and how he wants to live his life. Despite his extraordinary experiences, he's no different to many of us in struggling with overthinking and living up to his own expectations. Now he's older and wiser, he knows he can't do it alone. Nick, when did you feel like you'd made it?
Oh, no, you never feel like you've made it. I reckon that's the biggest mistake you make as a musician, is thinking you've made it, because then it gets pulled from under you.
But you were so young back in like 2012 when you first came onto the scene, and there was a lot of hype initially.
Yep.
Do you remember the urge to, buy into all that?
No, I felt like I hadn't really deserved my spot, because I guess, like you said, I got thrown into it pretty quickly. I was a third-year architecture student, had a video going crazy online, had never DJ'd in a club, and all of a sudden I'm playing, big stages and signing a record deal, and completely underprepared, even just in life skills. Like, just as a human adult, I had never been overseas, wouldn't even know how to wash an iron shirt, things like that. Like, a staple died of meagering, and all of a sudden I'm, the other side of the planet and expected to turn up and deliver.
Yeah, so you had imposter syndrome.
Oh, massively, still do. Like, you need to be a veteran before you're respected by your peers, and it's kind of like a network. I think it's like any business. You've got to make friends, and you need to be respected by your peers, and I was the new guy on the block.
And how did you handle that when they said, right, you're going to be a star, get on a plane, off you go?
Yeah, no, I didn't. So it was right. You got to prove yourself, get on a plane, let's do it. And it was a pretty steep learning curve, and it was a lot of fun. But I think riddled with anxiety and self-doubt, and somehow managed to pull it off for a while there. But I think people only see like what you want them to see. That you don't see the truth of it all, which was behind closed doors.
And how did it start in terms of where you went and the performances you did?
So the first show ever was in New York, and I was supporting Cascade. So that was huge for me, because he was a massive inspiration.
It's a good place to start.
It was a good place. It was a sponsored event by Google. It was actually a corporate event. So it was one of those things where, everything's paid for. And I was playing on the Launchpad, these things. But I didn't get to meet Cascade. It was all like, you have your time to play, now it's time to leave, shaking hands with people that I didn't know at the time who they were, and then back to a hotel, and then, everyone's asleep back home in Australia, no one to tell what's just happened, and then on to the next show. So, it was interesting. You become like a bit of a performing monkey.
And how rigorous was the schedule?
Initially, it was huge, and that's the right way to do it, is to have lots of shows booked in advance. And you wake up the next day and you go to the airport and you fly to the next show, and then you perform, and then it's the same for weeks.
And how long did that go on for?
Can't remember the initial tour. I don't think it was too bad. I think it was only 10 shows, but they were all massive shows. And then the most rigorous was when I played 40 shows back to back at Vans Warped Tour. I lived on a bus for 6 weeks, and we would do 12 shows in a row and have 2 days off, which was just crazy.
What kind of crowds were you playing to?
It was a mixed bunch. We did 40 states of the US, and everything from east to west coast, and then the Midwest. They don't like electronic music, turns out. They like rock and roll. So this is basically, it's a music festival, Vans Warped Tour, where you rock up to car parks, amphitheaters. It just depends on the grounds that you rock up on the day. You set up your truck that you're traveling with is your stage, and you're playing to just a bunch of kids right through to like 60-year-old rock band fanatics.
And most of the people you were playing to in the early days, they'd never seen this before, and they were really impressed by how cool that was. So that was your thing.
Yeah, I was the performing monkey. Like, And the other thing too is I'd never marketed my face before, which is very difficult when you start playing club shows. You get a club poster and you put your face on a poster and people are like, I've only ever seen the hands on the Launchpad on YouTube. So
did you feel like you were just hands on the Launchpad sometimes?
for a bit there, absolutely. And this is where I didn't feel I'd earned my place because people watched me play the Launchpad online and then I would play a club show and have to DJ other people's records. So for about 75 to 90% of the time, I was just doing what everybody else was doing and then throwing in the show-stopping piece, which was me pressing the buttons.
Yeah.
And that had a pretty short shelf life. I had to then go on to make originals and play the game and try and get rep outside of the Launchpad.
And when did you really start to feel the pressure come on? Because it's like, bang, out of nowhere, all this amazing stuff's happening and it's all taking off. Did you have in the back of your mind, I'm going to have to come up with something else pretty soon? Yeah,
the moment of, this is maybe going to fall over was the reason I got picked up on YouTube was Sia Furler, local Adelaidean legend. She was working in New York with some pretty big producers and they'd stumbled on my video and said, hey, this guy's from Adelaide apparently, do you know him? She said no, but she tweeted, who is M4Sonic? And that's really where the whole thing started. And within a couple of weeks I was on a plane to visit her and those producers and we were making records. And one of the records that I made with Sia was then pitched to Universal and to Sony Music. And we started going into a bidding war as to who was going to get it and who was going to sign me on all these things. Only until, I'm not sure who, but one of the parties pulled out. And so that record was no longer going ahead, but I've signed a deal. So I signed a record deal, I signed a publishing deal, signed to agency, was about to do all these touring, around the world and didn't have the record. And that's when you go, oh, what's plan B? And plan B was years of trying to figure out who I could collaborate with, but no one's as big as Sia, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the big reality check. And what I didn't realize is that the machine that the music industry is, it's quite common for people to cut records together, but they don't always go out. Where I was of the opinion that once you've done a record with someone, then it goes out.
Yeah.
Like that's a happening thing. It's not. It's just cyclical. You could do 10 cuts with 10 different vocalists. You could have other producers come in and finish records. But I put all my eggs in one basket. I didn't know any better at the time, obviously. And then my management team dissolved. So I was high and dry.
So you really felt like you'd been chewed up and spat out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a good way, though. Like, it was bloody privileged to be in that position, Like, it's not a bad thing to happen, but it's confronting. Yeah.
But you must have felt like, it was really unfortunate that didn't take off at that time.
Yeah.
You didn't get that track.
But again, like I said, I just hadn't earned my stripes yet. So that's all part of the journey, and it's happened to almost everyone. The ones that it doesn't happen to are the ones that make it very young, like the really young Martin Garrixes and things like that seemingly fall into it. They've actually they've earned their stripes 10 years before from very, very early ages and been in the right circles and have cut lots of records with lots of people. And then all of a sudden they're an overnight success. I was still on the early stage.
Yeah, whereas you really were an overnight success compared to the other guys who actually they've been doing the work in the background for years and they didn't come out of nowhere, but you actually did.
That's right.
And would you say that you're more of an introvert than an extrovert? How did you find being on that scene where it's like, the most extroverted place on the world?
No, I totally agree. Massively introverted. I took my PlayStation with me to America. I'd sit in the hotel or I'd sit in the apartment and just play PlayStation because I was I guess trying to reset and get ready for the next hurdle. Whereas I think the people that do really well, they back themselves and they go for it and they're totally extroverted and they can party, constantly and make those connections and really solidify their place in the scene. Where I was still of the opinion of myself that I wasn't ready.
Yeah, and so that stunted you in every other way.
I think so. Retrospectively looking back, yeah, probably.
What about the other artists and people that you met while you were on tour? Did they give you that feeling that you were an impostor, or were they trying to bring you in?
No, very welcoming, but they lived a different life to me. They're just so self-driven that they almost become binary and they see themselves in a different light. And I didn't agree with that so much. I didn't quite have the ego to support that lifestyle. But I think it's really important. I think arrogance sometimes gets mistaken for confidence and vice versa. You do really have to back yourself, and that takes a lot of mental stability, especially when you're doing it by yourself.
So what was the trajectory after that first year or so?
Mm-hmm.
Where did things go? Did it stagnate? Was it you trying to hold up against this pressure that was crushing down on you? Did other people know what kind of pressure you were under?
No one had any idea. And what happened is my YouTube channel thought I'd died because I took a couple of years off. And haven't spoken about this actually, but I went through vigorous legal battles when I was trying to get out of a management deal and then later out of a record deal. And that cost me everything financially. But it was the right move because I wasn't prepared to play the game that everybody had succumbed to. It's quite common in the music industry that you're essentially offered an advance and they own you.
Yeah.
But they own you, right? And it's at their discretion as to whether you make it or not yours. Because I was submitting records, I was still producing, I was still making, I was still performing, but I was getting shelved. And that means essentially the record wasn't fitting the label or they weren't prepared to spend to get it out. And that's quite stifling when your fans are saying, hey, when's the next song coming out? And you just say, I don't know. I think Adele actually honestly just did this morning. She got asked by a fan, when's your next record coming out? And she said, I do not know. She hasn't released in 5 years. And I don't know whether that's because she doesn't want to or because her label doesn't want to.
And that's definitely something that people wouldn't expect, that artists don't actually have the power in their hands a lot of the time, and that there's so many other things at play behind the scenes that must be hugely frustrating, especially when creativity comes in bursts and you have those periods of time where you can put out something brilliant or something that is you at that moment, and then it gets shelved and then you lose your momentum.
Sure, and you lose your confidence.
Yeah.
And it's just a really interesting industry, and I went completely independent. So for the last 3 years, I have pulled out of all those opportunities, left all the agencies, left all the labels. I'm still with my publisher. I'm still Sony. They essentially own anything that I ever write for the rest of my life.
Okay.
And then I started my own record label, which is the merch I'm wearing now. And Global League is fully transparent. We don't own the artists, we own their records. But we own them with the artists. We own equal share with the artist, and we work equally as hard as the artist. So it's like a team collaboration on their journey, but at any time that they want to up and leave, they can. It's just like you may as well work with good people while you can, but at any point that there's not a synergy or there's a misalignment of values, you don't stay working with those people because it is a detriment to everybody.
How were you made to feel at that time when your stuff was getting shelved and you weren't in control?
Oh, it's just frustrating, but, there's bigger problems out there. But it was just at that point I was starting to reevaluate the industry and I was getting educated, and that was really interesting. And it is fascinating how the mechanics of the music industry work, because essentially you become a brand and you become a face, but all the working components behind the scene are all run by suits. And you either have to be on their level or you have to work in a different way in order for it to be feasible. And for every successful artist that there is right now, there are teams of people working behind the scenes to make their music, to make their merchandise, to make their brand, to make their social platforms, to do their tours, all the way through to nutrition, their physical health, their well-being. There are a lot of people. And the reason I mention that is that now with this COVID-19 stuff that's happening, all those people are out of jobs, like all of them. Like that. Yeah,
it doesn't just happen. It's a massive network.
I mean, I'm collaborating with a project manager right now for building a live show. It's a live virtual show. But he's effectively been grounded since the artists that he's worked with don't have shows right now. And you don't think of the stage crew. You don't think of the lighting rig guy. You don't think of the makeup artist. You don't think of any of those people when you see your artist that you follow not putting out music. So, yeah.
It's just the face on the front of it, but there's so much more
100%.
to it. What about your circle at that time? Did you bring your friends along with you?
No.
What was the deal in terms of people that got introduced to your life, and were there sort of fake friends, people that wanted stuff from you? Were there some hard lessons in that way?
Yeah, some hard lessons to that. I was actually in a really toxic relationship when I had the opportunity to leave, so I ended that and then went overseas and then was living in LA on off for about 3 years because I got a visa over there. Had some incredibly fake friendships. Unfortunately had a new relationship back home in Adelaide, who I'm actually still with. And she was the only real person that saw the lows and the highs and stuck at it. But yeah, don't have any friends from school, unfortunately. Don't have any mates even from uni that I catch up with, because I think people wrote me off as soon as I went. over to do that. And the people that are in the music industry have pretty extreme lifestyles, very different to anything that we were brought up in school to understand. It's just...
And you just felt like that wasn't you?
No, I'm a bit more grounded, I think. I think I've got different moral values to a lot of people. I'm not saying that, I'm not writing everybody off in the music industry to be unethical, but there are a lot of people that are just so self-absorbed that you can't spend a lot of time with them without feeling a bit irritated. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you felt like you had people like leeching off you?
Incredibly transactional. What are you going to provide for me? And when you see through that, then you stop giving. Yeah.
How much did you attach your identity to being M4Sonic rather than Nick Boundy as you were going?
Absolutely detached, yeah.
Okay, so you're able to keep them totally separate.
Very difficult, yeah, because
there must be artists that become one and the same because they just live that life.
I think a lot of them that keep their names as well. So I refer to M4Sonic. I know it sounds awful because it sounds like I'm referring to myself in third person, but the M4Sonic project is a team of people. And I'm the front man and the founder. It's like starting a company. So, founded the company in 2013. Have had a lot of different people as part of that project and looking for new creative and amazing people right now. But it's a project, and at some point it will have an end life. And I was toying with the idea of writing down on a piece of paper the date in which I'm shutting M4Sonic down. And not telling anybody, but at least saying, guys, support while you can because this is not a forever thing. Because I think people just expect that forever you'll just...
That it goes on forever and ever.
100%. Like even Calvin Harris has started a side project. Can't remember what it's called, but he's just gone full like, I'm just going to do me. Like, hats off, sir. Hats
I
off.
guess that makes sense because people have to grow and evolve and you're not the same person 10 years ago that
Everything
you are
is temporary.
today.
I don't think anybody respects that. Everything is temporary. Yeah.
Through all that time, how were you able to keep your sanity, or did you feel like you did?
No, lost it. There were a couple of grounding things. My mum got cancer for the second time, and that was when I went, oh, this is what's important. I think facing mortality is obviously tragic, but that's when you realise like what is real and what is crap. She pulled through because she's a champion, which is fantastic. But it was at that point in time that you start to reevaluate what are the things that are important, and family's a massive one for me. And it's interesting, a lot of artists don't have hugely supportive and strong families. A lot of them don't. So that was a point in which I started to reevaluate. But yeah, in terms of like the mental health side of things, it's hard because we put so much pressure on ourselves that we overthink. And at that point, you know, everyone gets down, and it's all relative. Some people have serious shit to deal with, like either trauma, abuse, or they've seen shit, or they've had stuff that they've experienced that is full on. And other people just feel the weight of the world on their shoulders and can't understand why. And yeah, it's like being put in a dryer and just being constantly tumbled, and you come out of it completely scrambled. And it's at the point where you go, right, we're going to stop and defragment everything and rebuild. But I'm still rebuilding and probably always will be. And
so what was that point when you felt like you did need to stop, and how did you make that happen? Because obviously there's certain people relying on you, and there's a lot of things in play, and it's some people in that sort of position might feel trapped because they're like, well, I can't let these people down, and they're just getting pulled every which way. Yeah, I was like pretty grumpy with a lot of people for a while there, and I think they sort of were concerned. And so it was, I don't know, a good opportunity to stop. So stop playing shows, stop making music. How far in were you at that point? This is around 2016. Okay. So yeah, it's probably the start of the rebuilding process. Got new management that didn't work out either, and that's the problem, is that you can't just latch onto something and think that's going to save you. So yeah, things got worse before they got better. But yeah, just self-doubt. I was just riddled with anxiety and self-doubt. And I think that's pretty common amongst creatives. But then you feel kind of pathetic for having that depressive tendency when you don't really have anything to truly substantiate those feelings on. Yeah. You don't have a clear reason that you can give. Yeah, so I didn't talk about it, which is our way of dealing with it, I guess. Yeah. But of course we know you don't need a specific reason to experience anxiety or depression. That's why I'm really excited about this opportunity and grateful for it, because I think it's really great that we do talk about it. And I think there's some key things that when you reach out for help, you're not looking for sympathy. I think that's the biggest misconception, which is what deters people from actively seeking help. You're not looking for sympathy, you're looking for education. You're looking for, right, I can identify
all the things that aren't working, now I'd like someone to at least help with a solution that I can justify and start.
And also acknowledging that you can't do it all on your own. And
Yeah,
that
thank you. Perfectly well said.
You just don't have the knowledge or the tools, and that there's no shame in that. In fact, there's a lot of strength in speaking up and asking for help, but it's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not. Yeah, I guess it's the hardest part is then starting the help. But yeah, there's like I think in the music industry, there are some things that people need to get more educated on, and it's not part of your musical education, right? It's not part of music theory. Things like nutrition, getting good sleep, exercising, and then consistency and structure.
Doesn't really fit with the party lifestyle.
Not when you're jumping on planes, not when you're partying, not when you're not getting sleep, not when you're away from home. You don't see your family and friends for weeks or months. And then there's no consistency. That's not a given in the music industry. There is no such thing as consistency, or like you said at the start, when you make it. You never make it. You never make it. And then structure. Well, I'm not very good at structuring stuff, right? Like I'm all for being impulsive and jumping on things, but I don't sit down and plan. I'm not a planner.
Yeah, okay.
Which is bad. You need to plan. So yeah, still learning.
What about your creative process? What have you found sparks your creativity, and then oppositely, what stifles it and puts you in a rut?
Sure. Reality puts me in a rut. There's bills to pay. There's society's expectations of, just where you are in your lifespan as to when you get serious about family and getting settled. And the consistency thing really plays on me.
Have you settled down now?
I have. I'm married all of 6 months, which was the best thing I could have done.
Congratulations, man. That's
thanks.
Cool.
Didn't change anything. I've been married for years. Like as soon as I moved in with Rachel, we were married. But no, that solidarity that is actually hugely beneficial. But things like in the future, family. How does a lot of people write me off for being a DJ. I'm not a DJ. Like I learned to spin on decks only in the last 18 months.
Have you been saying I'm not a DJ for these past 8 years every day?
I'm not a DJ. I press buttons. But how can you say to someone, like when they say, oh, what's your career? I've realized now I'm just more of an aspiring entrepreneur because I build projects, right? But you can't, there's no consistency in that. And it's hard to have, goal setting and having objectives and things like that fit society's expectations of where you should be as a functioning adult.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Not rocking up to the same place at the same time and fitting
making the same amount of money each week.
Yeah, fitting into that traditional mold.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is, you're shooting for the stars, you're following what you're actually interested in. And that means that you will live a richer, more fulfilled life, probably.
Yeah, rich versus wealth.
But it's also, it can be very chaotic and difficult to predict, and
highly dysfunctional.
Humans hate that because we like to know exactly what's going to happen next.
100%.
But that's not very exciting when you say it's like that give and take.
Yeah, so you're either depressed in going for your passion or you're depressed in living someone else's dream.
Oh, that's not a great way to put it.
No, it's not a great way to put it. But that's probably what sparks the overthinking and the looking for the light at the end of the tunnel. So that's right. That's where you need to train your mind and body into focusing on what's important and getting validation in places that not someone else's validation, your own validation.
Yeah, because that's the only validation that's ever going to really count.
Yep.
How have you done that? How have you been able to calm your mind and pull yourself back and implement some of those things that you're talking about?
Strangely, in not actively helping myself but helping others, that's been hugely beneficial because I sound like a walking hypocrite when I start telling people how to do things and then go, oh, I'm not even doing those things. But that is hugely beneficial. Not being too self-absorbed, not being too hard on yourself. Just working for the greater good with other great like-minded individuals is hugely beneficial. What we're doing right now is hugely beneficial because it's cathartic for me to speak about some things that might be seemingly trivial to other people, but are hugely important to me.
Yeah.
But someone will learn, hopefully. And I'm making great connections too with other people that I can call upon in times of need, and vice versa. So that's the self-help.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Have you felt like you had to learn to really love yourself? Have you always, or did you, when you were going through all this pressure, and did you have that self-talk in your head of like, you're not good enough, you're an imposter, you can't do this? Did you have to teach yourself to, or recondition yourself not to do that?
Yeah. There's not a lot of self-love. but there is self-belief, and they're two different things. One is like, I believe I can perform at a level that will at least hit the benchmark, or I can go beyond that, and that comes down to preparation, right? But self-belief is something that I think you seek validity in your own self-love from either being comfortable with the way you act as a person, the way you treat people, the way you appear to people, and that is, you live that. You can't just think it, you've got to live it. So huge learning curve, and it's all in progress. Yeah.
You seem like you've come a long way to me, even though I didn't know you before, but you seem like a very calm, considered,
thank you,
deep thinking, not so young man anymore.
I start levitating. Yeah. No, I don't know. I agree with you. I think I learned a lot the last 4 years. I think you gotta have a pretty big reality check before you know yourself.
What patterns have you noticed in yourself and others for when things don't go so well?
The greatest people I've ever met have come from tragedy, which is awful. But there's been something like of huge magnitude that has grounded them to the point where they have a different understanding of life, or maybe appreciation of life. That's been the biggest, most obvious thing that I've ever noticed. When someone doesn't take themselves so seriously and gives themselves to others, they're the people that I really dig.
What about the opposite side of that? Things that you used to do, or you'd see things slip, or just in the way you used to organize your life when stuff wouldn't progress like you wanted it to, and then what you'd have to notice to snap yourself out of that.
Yeah, I noticed the lethargic tendencies that come on when you start to overthink or you're unable to get motivated. That's a really scary state. And then when your brain tries to justify that feeling, so like, I'm feeling a bit tired today. And then, don't really need to get out of bed because I'm self-employed. I work when I want to. And then, don't need to see my mates on the weekends.
And that becomes a big trap.
Yeah, and then you realize that all of a sudden you're basically blanked out. Your brain's not firing. You're not excited. You're not passionate. And
were you ever self-medicating with that?
No, fortunately not. I stay away from drugs, but in both the party tendencies and this seeking professional medical help, only because I think there's a lot to be done before you get to that stage, and unfortunately I haven't got too bad, but the only thing I would like is some medical cure to actually get some sleep. That would be great, but I think a glass of red will do it. Don't know. Or a really boring Netflix original, that seems to help. But yeah, other than that, I reckon physical activity is the key to getting me back on track.
What have you found the relationships been between you evolving as a man and as a person, and you evolving as an artist and creatively?
Okay. Probably the people that I'm with now and the quality of the people I'm with now is tenfold on the quality of the people I was with 8 years ago. So I've learnt to I've got a bit of a bullshit meter now.
Yeah, you would.
Yeah, and that's I reckon that's a really awesome life skill. So genuine people that have the same interests, the same desires.
And you're not thinking what does this person want from me?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, nailed it. I think that basically, that's it. If someone isn't transactional and just trying to use you as a stepping stone on their ladder, but are more so interested in just, they're in the good times and the bad, willing to build you up, you're willing to build them up, they're great people to have, and you can learn a lot. I think the best education you can have is through collaboration, and that can be in any respect, not just business, but in personal lives too. As we all become family men, we'll be reaching out to our other contemporaries that have lived it before us and saying, how did you do this unashamedly? Yeah, I think you just need to have that in every aspect of your life.
What would you go back and tell yourself in 2012?
Oh, that's a great question. I reckon I wish I was a little bit more mature in respects to hindsight, and not, this will sound like a contradiction, not being so hard on myself then, easing up, hopefully not being so introverted, and I absorbed it like a sponge, but in the wrong way. I was in fear. I should have just allowed myself to just learn and take my time and do things at the pace that suited me, not everybody else. And that, I reckon that would have saved me 6 years of my life.
Yeah, it's the beauty of hindsight though.
It is, yeah. That's all right. I'll teach someone else.
And what do you feel like you need out of life now?
Time. Well, I know that sounds weird, right? But what I need is the people that I love and they love me, and just time with them, and that's a life well spent. You reckon?
I totally agree with that. I think it's really interesting how you've come from a life that was extremely loud in so many ways and so extraordinary compared to the norm, to now it's very much the opposite, but you seem a lot more comfortable with yourself, or it sounds like that's the case now.
By the time things get loud again, they'll get loud in a good way, in a way that is ingestible. Like,
well, I guess you want to be able to stay quiet in your mind, like no matter what's going on, to an extent.
To an extent, I think that's I would love to get back to where things were a few years ago, because that time might not ever happen again for anybody, because like the whole world is changing. But I'm geared up, ready for it with the right people, and sharing those experiences with those people is going to mean more to me than any success that I could have had solo.
And that sounds like the best lesson you could have ever learned.
Quite possibly, yeah.
It's a good place to end it.
Nice.
Living with us more than we can bear.
Thanks for tuning in to the Bolton Brothers podcast as we do our part to change the face of men's mental health. Never underestimate how your story can change someone else's life. We can all make a difference. So who's next?